I thought I might try another project, and this one looks like it's going to be a really big one. It's I would say, a classical European old-style radio from the 50s. The brand is a Grundig, and the type is, let's see, the type is Type 4090. It has 9 tubes, and well, it's supposed to be 1950s top technology, German technology. Actually, the radio isn't mine. It's a radio owned by a colleague of mine, and he was sort of asking of me an appraisal, what it would take to refurbish the radio. Now, at first glance, it doesn't look like a lot of work, but believe me, it is. The wood finish looks okay. There are a few spots on the cabinet, a few spots here, as you can see. It's scratched, it's a little bit pitted. The veneer is really very dirty. So at least the radio would need a good cleaning, and actually, in my opinion, it would need a refinishing too. If not just clear coating, well, then at least a restaining and a clear coating. Yeah, the typical thing of this type of radio is that not only does it have a rather, for what it is, a rather complicated electronical part, but it also has a typically German, quite complicated mechanical part. And as you can see, these buttons, they are used to switch on and off all sorts of things, you know, like the output, the B auxiliary, the A auxiliary, and I don't know what exactly this is, but it could be simply the radio. I don't know, I need to check on the schematic. It has 4 bands as far as I can tell. It has long wave, medium wave, short wave, and FM, which in German is shortened by the word UKW, which means ultra korte Welle, very short or ultra short wave. KW means kurze Welle, MW means medium Welle, and LW means lange Welle. Anyway, like I said before, it's German. I would say it's good German quality. At least the finishing of the radio is solid. Considering it's from the 50s, it seemed to have weathered the years rather well, at least outwardly. Of course, the usual white paint spots are to be found on the radio too, which seems to be a classic now. But okay, so what the owner told me is that unfortunately he connected it up to the AC and something must have burned, because he told me there was a lot of smoke coming out of it. So like I said before, guys, always try to resist the impulse to want to switch on an old radio or an old appliance like this because if you do, you might get into a lot of trouble. If you don't create fire, well, then you will destroy it. Now, I hope that what got burned in the radio isn't a very expensive part, like the transformer or anything like that. If it is, well, then we're looking at quite an expensive tally. Okay, well, let's have a look at the inside of the chassis. Of the cab. The inside of the Grundig. And as you can see, it's quite a large chassis, but there's really not a lot to talk about. Okay, you have the obvious part like the tuning capacitor, which is here, and then you have the obligatory tubes, which are, compared to American radios, quite a bit smaller. But hey, this is a European radio, so they were used to building much smaller tubes. I counted them. There are 9. I don't know if they'll work, but they seem to be all there. This is a tuner part. That I know from having a quick look at the schematic. All the other tubes are all sorts of triode tubes. There are a few pentodes in it too, but nothing spectacular. In fact, if you look at the back of the radio, you can tell for yourselves. There is a, the eye tube to show you the tuning of the radio. This one. And then there's a double triode, which is the ECC 85, and then a few others. I don't know exactly what type they are. I need to have a look, but as you can see, there are 9 tubes all in all. The schematic mentions that there are also 3 or 4 light bulbs in it. Okay, so what really ticks me off, besides the fact that this radio has been plugged in and apparently something has burned, is that somewhere in the past somebody tried to modify it and cut out a piece of the back, as you can see, from this masonite, and tried to install an audio plug, as you can see here. A really ugly, useless piece of junk, and it's completely corroded and oxidized, and it's absolutely not original. Yeah, so somebody, I don't know, tried to do something with this radio, and my guess is at a certain stage somebody tried to use the radio as a kind of PA installation, or maybe as a sort of a cheap amplifier. Anyway, if this were my radio, this would go immediately. Then they also tried to install something like, I don't know, like an extension for a speaker, I suppose. Or maybe this is an input. I have no idea. This was connected to the radio, and as the other connector is not original, okay? So this will also go. Well, at least if it depended on me. Okay, so except for the amateuristic changes to the radio, the rest seems pretty much original. Not too rusted, not too oxidized. It has 4 speakers, and the speakers look original. At least 2 or even 3 of the speakers have the original Grundig label, as you can see there. This one, well, must have lost its label over the years. Maybe it's down somewhere below the chassis, I don't know. and there is the power transformer. I had a look at the schematic, and the B plus voltage should be somewhere around 260 volts. That transformer is probably a kind of audio transformer. So, and I sincerely hope it's not that one that burned, because if that one burned, that might even be a bigger pain to replace. Okay, so there you have the magic eye tube for the tuning. Well, like I said, it all looks pretty much original. So maybe, fortunately, people didn't mess too much with the original electronics. Oh, an interesting detail is that you can switch the radio to work between 110 and 220. 110 being the American mode, 220 the European mode. But in between, there are also other choices like 125 and 160 volts. Now I know in the States you can also use 125 volts, but 160 volts, well, it's anybody's guess where that would have been used. I really have no clue whatsoever. Okay, so now the next point. And you can see, the edges of the cabinet have suffered too and all that. So like I said, the radio might need, well, a fresh finishing and all that. Although I have to admit the veneer is still pretty much attached like it was. It isn't warped or anything. It's just dinged and dirty, and there are spots. So maybe I can get away with a simple finishing, some staining and then some lacquering, and that's it, if I'm lucky. Okay, so now we turn the radio over. Hang on. This is actually a very thin cable running back to the front of the radio and up all the way to the button mechanics. And as far as I can tell, this mechanical piece, which you see here, is used to switch between bands, in my opinion. Now, as you can tell, this is a very sensitive piece of mechanics, and if it's not well oiled and cleaned, it's probably going to break, and it's probably also not extremely accurate either. Or maybe I should say it is accurate, and because it hasn't been looked at for years and years, chances are that if I don't, if anybody doesn't take the pains to clean it, then it might break, or it might simply not work. Okay, so what else do we see? Well, we see a heck of a lot of coils, and these little trimmer caps, which are typical for the 50s. It's a little hood you can turn up or down, and by that changing the capacity of this trimmer cap. But like you can see, as you can see, it's also full of coils. Now, honestly, I'm not very keen on doing anything inside this part because it's high frequency, and well, as you know, this has probably been set in the factory, and by judging by the looks of it, it might still be okay. As a side note, you can see the metal is glistening. Now, this metal is probably covered with a layer of cadmium, and the cadmium has crystallized, funnily enough. It might be aluminum, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. But it is definitely metal. My best guess is it's steel with a cadmium layer on top. Okay, there are some big caps, like this one, which are probably paper caps. Those would need changing. There are some other caps like these. Well, they will need looking after. There are also a few electrolytics like this one, and I bet my life on it that this electrolytic and the other ones inside this cabinet are not good any longer. So those electrolytics will definitely need to go. Okay, well then there's this thing here, and it's attached to a little prong on the chassis. So my guess is this is a kind of a, well, I don't know, like grounding terminal for something, but I found it floating around. My guess is it was probably attached like this. But why anybody would want to attach a ground connector to a wooden case, that's anybody's guess. So I will need to find out what this is for too, obviously, if I decide to repair this radio. Okay, so now if we look down into the guts on the other side, you can see there are also a lot of classical resistors, like this one, for example. As far as I can tell, it has a value printed on it, but no color coding. So that might take a bit to decipher. And then there are some peculiar things, like this, for example, this connection there. Now that connection is probably just what it is, a connection, but possibly it might be a type of capacitor. It is a specialty part, and well, that's the kind of part you really don't want to touch because it's probably extremely sensitive. You can also see the base of one of the IF coils down there. So and there are quite a few of IF coils on in this radio, or on this chassis, I should say. I count at least 3, as far as I can tell. So yep, it's definitely going to be a complicated thing to work on. Also, the wires between all the parts are extremely thin, as you can tell here. These wires are incredibly thin. So that will add another dimension of complexity working to it, or on it. So, well, like I said, I'm not wildly enthusiastic about it, but it might be interesting. Okay, so what I need to do now is try to get the chassis out of the cabinet. Now, to do that, I need to unmount these screws. There are 4 screws, one here, one there, one here, and one there. So there are 4 screws in all, holding the chassis down onto the bottom plate of the cabinet. Unfortunately, to do that, I need to find a way to unscrew the buttons, and believe it or not, in between those two buttons, and I think this is the tuning button, in between those there's a space, and somewhere in this space there's a tiny little screw screwing on this button, holding on this button onto a shaft. So without damaging the bezel you see here, I need to be able to put a screwdriver in between those two buttons and undo that screw. Now that's going to be quite a task, because I already had a look, and if you take a look, you know, this is a small screwdriver, and you see, that's my problem. Yeah, so I will probably have to do it from the side like this, which makes it a little bit harder to do. Okay, so anyway, give me a moment to undo the buttons, and then let's have a look if we can undo the chassis from the cabinet. Well, as you can see, it has a quite intricate mechanism to turn the reception coil around the shaft to orient it or orientate it in the best direction for the best reception. That too is really typically German engineering, you know. Only they would think of making such a complicated mechanism to point something in the right direction. Well, as you can see here, this part, this intricate part is the tuner, or at least part of the tuner, and in my opinion this part is also used for the FM side of the radio, but as usual it will need some inspecting before I can tell for certain whether that is what it is. Okay, so now here we have the power transformer, and it doesn't look burnt, but I can immediately tell this wire has lost its insulation, at least in a little spot here, which doesn't bode too well, but it doesn't look burnt or melted, so that in effect is a positive thing. Okay, so the front of the radio looks okay. The glass is slightly discolored here, so I think the paint at the back, or I don't know if it's actually paint, but I think it is, has let loose. And if you look at it, there was some sort of a cheap kind of well, sticky tape at the back to protect the painting on the glass, and that has let loose over the years, so that will need some looking after. Here are the light bulbs that light the screen, and as you can see they probably don't work any longer, unfortunately. The buttons are pretty dirty, but it shouldn't be too much trouble to clean them or work on them. So yeah, and then the inside, well, the inside looks like the inside of a radio that hasn't been cleaned in years. Lots of dust and all sorts of tiny dirt particles and all that, rust, tiny pieces of rust and all that, but it looks like the radio has never been exposed to a lot of moisture or anything. It smells not too good, but well, you know, these old things, they are full of old chemicals and phenolium and you name it, and bakelite and all that stuff, and it has that peculiar but very typical stink of old appliances. There is a kind of a switch here for I don't know what it does, but it's spring actioned. So, well, that switch might be switching something of the in the reception part, because there is a tiny thin wire leading from it all the way under the tuner part here. So this wire might be, I suppose, used to switch on or off the FM part. Although another wire going from that switch is going to a tiny little meter, and this meter seems to be indicating the position of the ferrite antenna. So yeah, like I said, it's quite an intricate piece of electronics. There's another switch mounted down there in the chassis. That might be the power switch. But we won't be able to tell until we turn the chassis on its side. Oh, by the way, I managed to undo the buttons, and as you can see, they are held onto the shaft by a little screw and a bolt inside the button. So that is holding on the button to the shaft, and there's a big flat rotary button like this, and it has the same kind of mechanism to hold it to the shaft. So well, in the end it turned out not to be too nasty. I didn't have to use any kind of grease or cleaning fluid to get them unstuck, so a little bit of force was all it needed. Alright, so now inside, underneath the power transformer, is this, and this looks suspiciously like a very big electrolytic capacitor can, and this part, well, this is something special. According to the schematic, there's a full rectifier bridge built out of diodes, actually, not so the AC power is not rectified by help of a tube, but by a full diode rectifier bridge. And inside this can, if I'm not mistaken, is the rectifying bridge. And as you can see, there are 4 connections, so it's quite possible that this is indeed the rectifier bridge, and this electrolytic is the electrolytic mounted after the rectifying bridge to equalize the DC voltage. Okay, so what do I see? Well, I immediately see a capacitor which, well, has, well, melted or burned through. You see it here. So that's not a very good sign. It might even have been munched on by some creature. So that's a possibility too. And this blue paper cap also has seen better days, as well as this one. So yeah, there are quite a few capacitors that have suffered. This is an electrolytic one, and well, that one probably has seen better days too. But as far as burning is concerned, well, I can't see anything actually burnt inside here. I see a lot of coils, all sorts of coils and mechanisms, and I even see a few tube capacitors and you name it. So yeah, there are quite a few parts, and here is a button mechanism. As you can tell, it's quite dirty. And here is that cable mechanism, you know, leading from one of the buttons, as you can tell, all the way up into one of the coils. If I'm not mistaken, let me see. Yep, it goes to the apparently to the AM/IF coil, which is interesting. So yeah, that might be indeed a very sensitive part. So lots of resistors, and as you can tell, you know, if I do a close-up, the resistors in typically efficient German fashion are not color-coded. Well, not completely color-coded, but you can see their values printed on them. You know, like this one is an 820K. Blue is probably the tolerance. And that would make my life a little bit easier, because then I can just read out the value and then change the part if need be. So yes, a lot of capacitors have seen better days, I must say, but I don't really see anything burned yet. So okay, so what I want to do next, and that's probably the only thing, the last thing I'm going to do to this chassis for now, is measure whether the power transformer is still good or not. It's an original Grundig, as you can see. I don't know if you can see it, but no, probably not. Well, anyway, it's an original Grundig transformer. So I'm going to measure it out just to see whether it's okay. And if the power transformer is okay, well, then chances are that another part must have burned. And I wouldn't be too far off the mark if I would say that it was the electrolytic, this big electrolytic, which started to smoke. Yeah, I wouldn't be astonished that this was the part, the culprit, or the source of the smoke. Because as you all know, electrolytics are infamous for shorting out after quite a few years of being used. So let me turn over the chassis back upside, back to its original position, let's say, and let's have a look at the power transformer. Yep, the power transformer is okay. So at least I measured the secondary and the primary, and it looks okay. I see nothing particular. I can't tell, of course, whether inside the transformer there is a short, but let's see. If we measure from one of the secondaries, let's say this one, to one of the primaries, let's say this one, well, as you can tell, there is no short. Okay, so now we're going to try another secondary, which is the little gizmo which tells the position of the ferrite antenna. Yeah. Nothing. Okay. Okay, so you can tell there's nothing there. Okay, so oh, I measured the fuse, by the way, and the fuse measures good. So the fuse didn't blow. So if there was a kind of a short or something, then it mustn't have been a very heavy short. So okay, let me just get on with it. So let's see. So okay, this is a primary. So no short here. Let's see here. No short there. Now let's see the rectifier bridge. Nope, no short. And let's check this one. No short either. Okay, so there are, at least I'm reasonably confident to say that there are no shorts from primary to secondary, so which is a good thing. Now this is the audio transformer. Let's see what this one tells us. Okay, so where I'm going to measure here, nothing. Here, nothing. Here, nothing either. Here, nothing. Here, nothing. Here, nothing. Okay, let me see. Well, it's kind of hard to tell, but okay. Well, the fact that I'm measuring and that there is nothing doesn't automatically mean that it's bad, but okay. So that output works. Okay, so that's one of which we are pretty certain that it works. Now these two might also work. Ah, look, that one works too, so that's okay. So I must have hit on the common. And then this works too. And then this works too. Okay, so measured from the common, oh, that might be a break. Well, not certain, but I mean, if we have a transformer that measures, well, it's dropping. Let's see how far it will drop. It's still dropping. So okay, there is conductivity, but well, you know, 500K, well, is a bit too much for an audio transformer, although as you can tell it's still dropping. But I'm a little bit suspicious of a simple resistor measurement taking that long to drop to its final value. Well, it's iffy. It seems to be stabilizing around 400K. Now, I don't know if that's what they intended it to be, you know, somewhere around 400K. Oh, okay. It's stabilized around 390K. So 390K for an audio transformer is, well, is a bit high. But let's not forget I'm measuring in circuit. So it's quite possible that there are parts that are influencing the measurement. Now anyway, it's not a total open, yeah. but I wouldn't say that it means that at least this part of the coil is good. But okay, it's not an open, yeah. So there is conductivity. Okay, so what is my final assessment? Well, okay, it's quite clear that the chassis of this radio is in dire need of a good looking after, yeah, some TLC, because it's quite obvious that it hasn't been cleaned in years. And when I say years, I'm really not exaggerating. I would be astonished if the last time this radio was seriously looked at was the day it was assembled in the factory. Well, that, and of course those modifications somebody in the past has made to use this radio as a sort of a, well, PA amplifier, my guess is, or a cheap hi-fi amplifier. So yeah, it's in dire need of some TLC. The chassis is rusted, but not in a very exaggerated way. It certainly is dirty, so there's a lot of dust and crud to be cleaned away. I doubt the tuning capacitor in the state it is would work at all. I don't think so, because it's full of dust and oxidation and all that. Interestingly enough, this radio is full of interesting little gizmos, like this. Well, I would call this a kind of a rotary switch, perhaps. Or maybe it's a sort of a power potentiometer. Difficult to tell. I don't know. I need to have a look at it. There's also this interesting little gizmo, which I think is a kind of a coil assembly, or maybe it's even a motor, which shows you with a rotary dial where the position of the ferrite antenna is. So, and that will need quite a bit of work, because as you can see, it's buried all down behind the glass and into the chassis. So yeah, it's going to need quite a bit of work. So the except for mounting it back temporarily into the cabinet, I'm not going to do anything more to it. The only thing I did was attach the ferrite antenna, because it's simply hanging loose. Yeah, so I had to attach it with a little cord, as you can tell, because it was simply dangling around. So apparently it let loose of its socket, or maybe the socket even broke, but I can't tell without having a good look at it. So, as I said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mount back the chassis into the cabinet, and then I'm going to make a list. Well, paper list, or maybe I'll even make an Excel sheet with all the parts listed on it, and to give the owner an estimate of the amount of work and what it might cost to bring this radio back into its former glory. And then we'll see if the owner says okay for the budget that I will propose. Then we'll have a new project, guys. If the owner says no, or he will ask me for a cheaper kind of repair, well, then we'll also have a project, but it'll be a shorter one. It will be interesting for me too from another point of view, which is that up to now I haven't repaired a radio with a wooden cabinet like this one. Now I have watched you guys, well at least some of you, how you repair wooden cabinets, and I hope I'll be as dexterous as you are in repairing it or well refurbishing it and cleaning it. In any case, it'll be interesting to do. Oh, just one side remark. This cabinet and everything in it has a very strange, almost, well, I would say a dull golden color. It's not really brass, it's not really copper, it's almost like gold but with a lot of crud on top of it. So when it was new, it must have looked really shiny and really nice. So let's hope I can bring it back to its former glory. But one thing I can tell you as a finishing message, if I take on this project and the owner says yes, go ahead, this is not going to be a very short project, as you can tell. This is going to take a lot of time and a lot of cleaning. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed this look at a Grundig 4090 from 1957. Bye.